Normally, I'm not one to snoop around in my daughter's business, but when she doesn't leave her room for over a good 12 hours, I think I have a good enough excuse. It was around 8 p.m., and my daughter had been in her room playing video games since 8 a.m. I heard her scream a few times throughout the day, but recently she'd been getting into horror games, and that was now a normal occurrence, so I thought nothing more of it. But she'd literally been in there all day without leaving once. I needed to take an intervention. I opened the door casually, calling out her name. Her not answering was my first clue that something was wrong. I checked her bed, closet, and even shelves and cabinets, but there weren't any clues as to where she could have been. Getting frantic she'd been kidnapped or worse, I decided to dwell on the thought that she may just be outside or in another room, and I just didn't hear her sneak out like she usually does. Before I left, I couldn't help but notice her GameCube. The controller was still on the bed, as if she'd been playing it. Feeling sneaky like it was my responsibility, I turned the station on to play whatever game was in it for a bit, just to see how it had kept my daughter's attention for 12 hours. I felt a wave of nostalgia as the game started up, of when I used to play games with my daughter all the time. After I had tested a quick sample of whatever this was, I vowed to play a little with my daughter. She needed someone to be herself with anyways, especially with how depressed she's been recently. I was so caught up in my thoughts that the title screen music took me by surprise a bit. After a moment, I realized it was Pokemon Channel. I remembered my daughter used to love playing that game. Maybe she was just getting re-addicted to playing it? Whatever the case, there was only a new game option, so I selected so. After a while, I found myself in what looked like a bedroom. The only thing about this room was that the walls appeared to be drenched in blood and contained morbid little Pikachu dolls littered throughout it, plus a less than appealing Pikachu head as a TV. No wonder my daughter was screaming earlier. Fighting down my nausea, I looked around the room. After a while, the red everywhere and sharp fang scare effect wore off, and I could examine with more ease, let's just say. I noticed a picture of a Jirachi hanging on the wall. It was one of the few Pokemon I knew right off the bat since it was one of my daughter's favorites. The picture would have been pretty if it didn't have a large red X over it with bloody claw marks. A bit scared to examine the rest of the game world, I instead opened the start menu to find what looked like a journal or diary of some sort. There appeared to be entries, so I read further on. I didn't get very far though, as the menu closed without my command. I came face to face with a Pikachu, who looked like he wasn't very pleased. It scowled at me, and the GameCube shut off. Well then, I was a bit insulted, of all things, and quickly turned the system back on. Soon I was back in action in the room. The Pikachu wasn't there anymore. The room was still the same, Pikachu doll staring down at me, so I stole the screen around to the back of the room to find myself freeze in fear. There was a Jirachi floating in front of the door. Its eyes were closed, but the one on its stomach was open and hyper-realistic. The eye looked like it was cracked and broken, and from that it was bleeding. I also noted the colors of it were grayscale, but I was too preoccupied staring at the eye, which was staring right back at me. I cannot describe the relief I felt when that thing left. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out. It felt like an icy claw had been holding a grip on me, and that it had released me. I wanted to take the opportunity to turn this thing off, but something compelled me to keep going. I decided that if that thing popped up again, this game was going in the trash. Pika. I turned around to find the Pikachu staring at me with a melancholy face, standing in front of the TV. It glared at me, then went to turn the TV on. I followed it, a bit scared of what it might do if I didn't. Plus, I'd rather be with something so cute and cuddly than that disturbing eyeball creature. It changed the channel to P&F, which according to the game was the news. It zoomed into a duck Pokemon, which didn't do or say anything. I think it was called Psyduck. Playing the game was starting to recharge my old Pokemon knowledge. It then panned to a new screen, which showed the Jirachi floating through a crimson, carcass-strewn meadow, a burning forest, a bloody beach, a dead and snowy mountain, and it made sure to get it at a lot of angles. The Jirachi finally stopped in the middle of darkness and turned to face me. The Psyduck's eyes suddenly went black and turned to face the screen. In the text box where there had been previously nothing, something appeared. Save X. The Pikachu quickly changed the channel to the egg channel, whatever that was. There was a white egg wiggling around in a void of darkness. It had cracks and blood was dripping from them. It wobbled back and forth very slowly, almost painfully. I didn't want to know what was going to hatch from that thing, and apparently the Pikachu had the same thoughts as it turned the TV off. Back in the center of the room, the screen panned toward the Pikachu, and a text box appeared with, "Brother wants to know if you'll play with him. O.X." And assuming O was for yes and X for no, I pressed O, starting to get into this game despite how unnerving it was. It panned away from Brother, and he grinned, showing off his toothy fangs. Another text box had appeared at the top of the screen. "You're going to regret that." And I sure as heck did. He went outside, and I followed along behind, although I didn't have much choice as the game made me. It wasn't much prettier outside than inside, though. The sky was blood red, although it was prettier than the dead Pokemon bodies lying everywhere. Brever didn't seem to be fazed at the scene as much as I was, and just went along to the meadow next door. This field wasn't much different. Blood and bodies, although there was a hole in the ground which Brever seemed to take interest in. He reached into it and pulled out one of those unsettling hyper-realistic eyes like the one on the Jirachi. He threw the eye at me, which I casually let fall to the ground. Brever shook his head and glared. "Catch it and throw it to Brever," the text informed me. I grimaced and moused over the eye to pick it up. Instead, I picked up a dead Poochyena body, which I quickly dropped back to the ground. Brever had doubled over laughing on the other side of the screen, to which I glared at him. He grinned and made a motion eager for me to pass the eyeball. I selected it and threw it as fast as I could without looking at the screen. When I looked again, Brever was holding it and threw it back. I ran to the other side of the screen so I wouldn't have to see it. The screen faded to black, and I assumed the minigame sequence was over, although Brever was still holding the eyeball. Then, without any warning whatsoever, he ate it. I sat there, disgusted as he finished it off, grinning afterwards. The screen suddenly shifted to black, then back again. Except when it came back too, the sky was a dark gray and everything else was a darker tint. Brever's smug grin was now melancholy once more. He walked back through the meadow into the house very slowly, with the same gloomy expression all the way, almost like a zombie. If anything, it was more disturbing than his previous morbid mode. Once back at the house, everything was bright and uncheery once more. I noticed a trail of blood on the floor that wasn't there previously. I followed it to a small closet-like compartment, and preparing myself for the worst, I opened it. Inside, the walls were covered in blood, with a pile of skitty limbs and guts on the floor, head adorned on top. I barely had 3 seconds to look at this sight before Brever ran over and shut the closet door. He made a threatening growl at me, then ran to the back door and on outside to the bus stop, I tagging along behind. Out at the bus stop, the sky was red and the environment throbbing once more. The bus to Viridian Forest pulled up and we got on it, even though I didn't select it, but I was accustomed to this now. After a what would be innocent cutscene, we arrived to a forest set aflame, charred bodies littering the ground. Picking our way through the landscape with ease, well, Brever did so with ease, we went to the other side of the forest. Here, it was like a campsite, except the large bonfire in the middle was a pile of fleshy, burning bodies, all set alight and fueling the flame. There was also a projector, which, after a quick tinkering by Brever, turned to the starry sky. A movie had started playing, and I braced myself for the worst. It certainly delivered. Most of the movie was buggy and glitchy, but from what I can tell, it was mainly other Pokemon being brutally maimed and killed. Dead, bloody carcasses, pretty much everything I'd seen up to that point, just in different angles and poses. Although seeing them in animation was a bit more unnerving, despite how the animation programming seemed choppy and shaky, almost like the game wasn't made for it. But what was different was that the eye would be there, and flash into static every now and then. A more prominent notice was that the Jirachi was in some frames too, without its eye, although it seemed to be tortured more than murdered. Some scenes where it was drowning in a lake of blood, a snake-like thing impaled through where its stomach eye would be, it being hung from some ceiling, and a whole variety of others. But it looked like it was suffering and just couldn't die no matter what happened to it. It ended after taking its dear, sweet time. Once back on the ground, Brever started to charge for an attack. He fired a bolt of lightning and struck the projector. The screen went black, and then back to the body fueling fire. Except the projector was gone, and everything was in a darker, more gray tone. Brever started painfully strolling through the forest and back to the bus stop, all with that face void of emotion. Back home, Brever started running around, and I wanted to take my time before our next outing. I browsed around the room, now completely immune to its ghastly interior, and found a binder. I opened it to find a bunch of Pokemon cards, except every Pokemon in it was morbidly disfigured. There was an Oddish, brown and wrinkled like a dried prune, maggots crawling out of its eye sockets, and other slashes in its carcass. Magby was hung from the collar-like thing on its neck, only a few tendons connecting its head to its frail body. In the Milotic card, it almost looked like a dried-out snakeskin, pus leaking from the several cracks along its flesh. Pucciano looked like a pile of roadkill, mangy, blood-clotted fur with flies floating around it and foam at the mouth. Vulpix had an oily-like substance dripping from its mouth, and black, soulless eyes. And of course, the Jirachi card looked like the demented version that I was getting used to. But the one that genuinely gave me chills was the Pikachu. It was curled up in a ball with its eyes closed, floating in a fleshy red void, and bobbed up and down as I moved the card around with a control stick. It reminded me of a fetus still in the womb, which, quite frankly, creeped the heck out of me more so on a personal level than the other cards, so I hastily changed it. Once I was done browsing the card collection, which was pretty quick, I exited out to find Brever holding one of those morbid Pikachu dolls. He looked somber and walked around slowly with it for a minute, almost like a lost child looking for his mother. Then he turned to me. He walked up to me and asked a question. "Do you know what's happening to me?" It didn't talk in third-person perspective like before, so this was a fourth wall breaker. I selected X because, quite frankly, I still didn't have much of a clue as to what was going on at all. He sighed and looked despondent and defeated. He set down the doll, then ran out the door, I following in tow. At the bus stop, we hopped on the bus to Cobalt Beach. The beach was littered with bodies and the water was bloody. A perfect vacation destination. Before I could get a good examination of the place, however, Brever ran out into the ocean. He sprinted way far out there, then started swimming, and eventually went on out of my sight. The screen faded to black, then back. When it came to, the sky was gray and everything was in a darker tone. Brever came swimming back to shore. His face looked fearful, an emotion I hadn't seen from him yet. A message appeared atop the screen. Brever tried to wash away the pain. It didn't work. He walked slowly back to the bus, looking around every few seconds, almost like he saw something who knows how awful in that ocean, and it might come back to get him. Once on the bus and back at the house, he still seemed a bit paranoid. I myself felt pretty good since that was the shortest outing yet. I selected the Pokemon Mini that was sitting in the binder, since I didn't get to check it out before. There were 6 games to choose from, so I picked a random one on the bottom left. When the game started, it was a glitched mess. I was surprised I could find the start button. Once it started, the background to it was a solid black, with a pair of sharp teeth floating in it. A heart appeared below it, and I pressed A. The fangs opened and closed like it was eating it, and a positive bleep sounded, so I assumed that whatever I did was right. I kept eating the hearts for a couple of seconds, until an eyeball appeared. When I ate it, the minigame glitched down to a chaotic mess even worse than before, along with a high-pitched noise that grated my eardrums. I quickly mashed a variety of buttons until I exited out of that mess and was back in the room. Trevor was standing in front of the back door, and I knew what that meant before he even opened it and went to the bus stop. This time he went to Mount Snowfall. It was snowing softly, and frostbitten bodies were piled halfway under it. I felt more sad here than anything. It wasn't grotesque and brutal like the other places, but it seemed more like a graveyard. Trevor looked the same as he slowly treaded over the snow and to the next section, into a temple dubbed by the game the Ruins of Truth. When we got inside, it was pitch black. Trevor walked over to the left to find 2 what I would assume to be flowers, except they had eyeballs instead of petals. He charged up an electric attack and fired it at one, which caused it to glow and illuminate the room in a dark red hue. He lit up the other one, which made the room even brighter. The room was still fairly dark. The red hue just seemed to make it more ominous. Trevor walked over the bridge and to the other side where a tall stone tablet was sitting with a big O and X button. I selected it and a question had appeared. Redemption? I suddenly felt very anxious and bit my lip. Unsure of how to answer, I selected O and hoped for the best. Trevor walked up to the O button, and the tablet sank into the ground. The pillars surrounding the now hole in the ground suddenly lit up, and I felt a pit in my stomach. The ground shook as something started to rise from the hole, although Trevor didn't even flinch. Out of the hole rose that demented Jirachi. Text had appeared on the top of the screen. There is no redemption. The eyeball in Jirachi's stomach rose over its head, and just when I was about to cover my eyes, the screen cut to black. When it came back, it was on the egg channel. The same egg from before was still there. Before I could react, the bleeding egg had started glowing, and then hatched. Out popped a Jirachi, a normal, non-mentally scarring one. It flew off the screen, and then the channel changed like when you're watching TV on full screen with Trevor, and went to a static channel titled 444. The background was red, fleshy, and throbbing, just like in the Pikachu card. Speaking of the devil, Trevor was in the middle of the screen too. Text had appeared on the top of the screen. Trevor will never be born. He closed his eyes, gave a wide, sharp-fanged grin, and the eyeball that had been haunting me the whole game opened up on his stomach. As soon as it appeared, it was gone, and the game was back on the title screen, the continue button still missing. I sat there, dumbfounded for at least a good, solid 5 minutes. It was as if all the horror I had just witnessed was finally crashing down on me, and I was petrified, afraid to move a muscle. Despite everything rational inside my mind screaming at me, "You're an idiot," I tentatively started to select the new game option. Mom? Why are you in my room? The tension broke, and I had to cover my mouth to keep from screaming. I sighed in extreme relief when I saw that it was just my daughter at the door, looking at me like I belonged in a mental asylum, which at the moment, I felt like I did. I noticed that it was getting late and told her to go in my room and wait for me there. She agreed, although still obviously confused. I'd ask her the questions later, but for the moment, I took the CD out of the GameCube. I turned around to go throw this thing in the trash where it belonged. But I was cut short. In the mirror was the Jirachi eye.